Welcome everyone to our Lake Stewardship Workshop. I'm Jim Irwin, Chair of the Readymount Biosphere Reserve. I'll be hosting tonight's workshop, and Dennis Hodgson and Daryl Kynes will be assisting. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Riding Mountain Biosphere Reserve is in Treaty 2 and 4 territories of the Anishinaabe people, and say that we respect and share their all-important teachings that water is a sacred gift essential for all life. Since 1986, Riding Mountain Biosphere Reserve has been bringing people together to share their knowledge for the well-being of our communities. In this respect, we are very pleased to have Brandice Hollier share in this session of our Lake Stewardship Workshops. Brandice is the Aquatic Invasive Species Project Coordinator. Brandice was born and raised in Neepawa and grew up frequenting the lakes of southern Manitoba and the Parkland region with her family. Her interest in resource management and passion for conservation led her to attend Brandon University, where she completed a Bachelor of Science in Geography and a Master's of Science degree in Environmental and Life Sciences. She conducted her master's research in Riding Mountain National Park, where she studied the water quantity and quality of Octopus Creek as it flowed into Clear Lake. She has worked in various positions in Riding Mountain National Park with resource conservation, and most recently with the AIS program as the project coordinator. Brandice will be giving two presentations tonight. Her first presentation is entitled An Overview of Riding Mountain National Park's AIS Prevention Program, and her second presentation is entitled Don't Move a Mussel, How You Can Help Prevent the Spread of AIS. Brandice?
So I'd first like to thank Jim and the Riding Mountain Biosphere Reserve folks for giving me the opportunity to talk about Riding Mountain's AIS program this evening. I'd like to acknowledge that Riding Mountain National Park is in Treaty 2 territory, where we work with Anishinaabe First Nations from Treaty 2, 4, and 1. We honor, acknowledge, and recognize Indigenous contributions to the park, the province, and to Canada. So tonight I'm going to be talking about Riding Mountain's Aquatic Invasive Species Prevention Program. And I'm sure many of you already know what an aquatic invasive species is. So I'm going to glaze over this pretty quickly. But it can be a fish, invertebrate, virus, bacteria, parasite, or plant species that has been introduced into a new aquatic environment outside of its natural range. So typically when they're introduced to a new aquatic ecosystem, they don't have natural predators, so their populations expand very rapidly. And then they outcompete native species for food and habitat resources. So why are we concerned about aquatic invasive species in Riding Mountain National Park? Clear Lake draws thousands of visitors from all over the world to Riding Mountain every year to swim, fish, and boat. And the lake, Clear Lake, and all of the other lakes in the park have natural and cultural significance, and as such, it's very important. It's a very important resource that staff at Riding Mountain strive to protect. So quick background on the program. The Aquatic Invasive Species, or AIS program, started in 2015 in Riding Mountain. And the goal of the program is to prevent the invasion of AIS to Riding Mountain's water bodies. I'm sure many of you have heard of zebra mussels before, but it's important to note that in Riding Mountain, we are concerned about other invasive species as well, including rusty crayfish, spiny water flea, whirling disease, black algae, smallmouth bass, and invasive Phragmites. There are three main strategies we use within the AIS program in Riding Mountain. The first strategy is to prevent the spread of AIS. This is the main focus, as we know that prevention of the introduction of AIS is more economically feasible than remediation. The second strategy is early detection and rapid response. The earlier you detect an invasive species, the easier it is to respond. And the third is to control and manage if there were an invasion. So this may include containing the species within a lake or ecosystem, eradicating the species, or controlling the species population. So in Riding Mountain, because we are a federal jurisdiction, we follow the AIS regulations within the Fisheries Act. We also fall under the Province of Manitoba's Water Protection Act, as well as the National Parks General Regulations. And within the park, we get a restricted activity order every summer. So that allows us to make watercraft inspections mandatory for anyone who wishes to launch in the park's waters. So we take a multi-step approach to managing the AIS program in the park. So step one is to identify threats. So what are the potential AIS that could be introduced to Riding Mountain, and what threats do they pose to the ecology and economy of Riding Mountain? The second is to identify possible actions. So what can we do to prevent the AIS from coming into the park? The third is to use the resources we have to implement prevention strategies. And the fourth is to modify and adapt our program as new threats arise or if an introduction does occur. Riding Mountain has 8 watercraft accessible water bodies, and out of these 8, only 2 are accessible to motorized watercraft, which significantly reduces the risk of AIS. Clear Lake is one of the few lakes in the region that offers premier boating opportunities. We see a lot of wake boats and sailboats and fishing boats, a lot of more complex watercraft than a lot of the lakes in the area, meaning that they're higher risk for bringing AIS. Many visitors travel from other regions that contain contaminated or high-risk water bodies, so we use our inspection data that we collect at the inspection station to determine where our boaters are coming from and determine the risk levels. We are close to infested water bodies, such as Lake Winnipeg, and we have high visitation rates in prime zebra mussel spawning period during the summer. The importance, the risk of invasion is high and the impacts may be severe. So I'm going to identify some of the threats and how they can impact various parts of our ecosystem. So first of all, the introduction of an aquatic invasive species will impact the ecological integrity of our aquatic ecosystems. So like I previously mentioned, most aquatic invasive species don't have any natural predators, so their populations may expand very quickly, and many of them also have very high reproduction rates. They can alter the food webs and impact native fish populations and reduce biodiversity. They outcompete native species for food and habitat resources. And just as an example, as you can see in the pictures here, zebra mussels are selective filter feeders, which means they eat the good phytoplankton and leave the bad. You may have heard that zebra mussels are good for water clarity. Well, they might clear up the water, but it's bad for species who rely on that phytoplankton to survive. And also by leaving the toxic bad algae, they can cause algal blooms. Another big threat that aquatic invasive species pose is to our Indigenous relationships. Kissi-Kuinan First Nation, 61A, located on the west shore of Clear Lake, holds Clear Lake as a very important fishery for our partners, and water also has very important spiritual values for them as well. Another big threat is to visitor experience. If we were to get zebra mussels in Clear Lake or any other water body, they start to wash up on the shore, and when they start decomposing, their shells break down and become very sharp and very smelly, and this could deter people from coming to the beach and participating in important recreational activities on the lake as well. It could also have economic impacts on the town site, so a decrease in visitors would mean an impact on the economy, and it might become hard to sell properties or cabins in the town if nobody wants to come to the lake anymore. And then it can have some pretty significant downstream impacts as well, as the outflow of Clear Lake goes from Wasserman Creek or Clear Creek into Lake Audie and the Little Saskatchewan River. So the second step is prevention. So like I had mentioned, our prevention program began in 2015 and has grown since then to have 2 permanent staff and more students than we did in the past. It's still not enough for us to be at every lake, unfortunately, but we're doing our best. We also consolidated our boat launches on Clear Lake from 4 to 2. So this would reduce the number of places where motorized watercraft can launch, but it doesn't stop non-motorized watercrafts from launching there. we try and have people patrolling these areas as well as the outlying lakes as much as we possibly can, but we rely on education and outreach a lot to make sure that the word is getting out and watercraft owners know that they have to get an inspection before they enter the lake. And we work to develop relationships with external partners as well to help spread the message. So I'll talk a lot more about our inspection and decontamination program in my next presentation, but it is mandatory for every watercraft who wishes to launch their watercraft on a water body in Riding Mountain to undergo an inspection. So we define a watercraft as anything that holds people and floats. So it can be an inflatable canoe or kayak, or hard-shelled canoe or kayak, motorized water boats, inflatable unicorns, stand-up paddle boards. And we also inspect water-related equipment as well. So this could include life jackets, paddles, scuba gear, sand toys. We inspect contractors' equipment when they're coming to do work around our aquatic ecosystems. So we try to make sure that we're extremely thorough in what we inspect and how we're inspecting it. With that being said, some of the questions that we ask will help to determine the risk level of the watercraft. So one of the first questions is, have you launched your watercraft in the last 30 days? And I'll talk more about that in my next presentation. Adult zebra mussels can last out of water for up to 30 days. So that's why we ask that one. Where was the last place that you launched your watercraft? And then we get people to drop their motor as well. If there's water in it, then they're probably going to have to get a motor flush on their watercraft. And then we'll issue a temporary or seasonal permit. Again, I'll talk more about that in my second presentation, but a temporary permit is good for up to 7 days. So this is good for campers or people who are just visiting the park for a short period of time. And a seasonal permit would be for those who don't leave the park with their watercraft all summer. It just launches in Clear Lake or one of the other water bodies in the park. One of the important things to know with either of these permits, as soon as you launch your watercraft outside of the park, your permit becomes invalid and you must get it re-inspected. And then once we ask the questions, if we determine that a decontamination is necessary, we do those on site as well. And again, I'll talk about that more in my second presentation. So our triage and permitting system, it's based on an honor system. So we ask a bunch of questions and then we determine if a decon is required. So the inspections take about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the complexity of the watercraft. And then we use the statistics gathered in our triage form to determine where watercrafts are coming from and the potential risk factors for our lakes. And then our decontamination program. So a decontamination takes about 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the complexity of the watercraft and what kind of decon is required. So we use low pressure, 60 degrees Celsius hot water at a 10-second exposure time to kill zebra mussels. And there are different types of decontaminations depending on where we find mud or sand or plants or water in the watercraft. So for example, if the whole watercraft is dry, but your motor has water in it, then we might just do a motor flush. And then the way our decontamination system works is that we actually have filters built in, so all the water is collected in the pan and cycled through our filtration system. So here's some statistics on our program from when it started to 2020. So our inspections have been increasing. So I think that now that we have an increased awareness, or visitors have an increased awareness, there's an increase in compliance as well. And in 2019, that's when we started our seasonal permit holder course. So we put a lot of people through that first year, which was really awesome. Last year, we had to move to an online system, and we'll be doing that again this season. So if you had a seasonal permit in the past and you're looking to get a new one, stay tuned for more information on that. So I'll talk a little bit about some of our education and outreach that we do. So the seasonal permit holder course is free of charge. The initial course takes about an hour and a half to complete. You have to take a short quiz to pass it, and then you're free to go and get your inspection done on your watercraft. You'll then be issued a permit and a sticker, and you're good to go for the rest of the season unless you launch outside the park, and then you need to come back for another inspection. If you take a seasonal permit holder course, you don't have to take it again in year after year. You just have to take a quick refresher quiz or course. This course was very well received over the last couple of years, and we felt that it was very important to explain to visitors why we're doing what we're doing. Got a lot of good buy-in from visitors and a lot of really good questions, so it was really great to see. Some of the other ways in which we promote the program and raise awareness is through signage, various brochures, partnerships with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in the province of Manitoba. We have interpretive programming, we do a lot of social media posts, and we go to special events like the Mid-Canada Boat Show. Another part in identifying actions is our monitoring reporting program. So here in the park, we do 3 different types of sampling for zebra mussels. So we do environmental DNA sampling, we do veliger sampling, and we'll do substrate sampling as well. And then we report on our efforts and findings to the province. Veligers monitoring. Veligers are the larval form or the very early life stages of zebra mussels. They're microscopic, so you can't see them with the naked eye. So we use this net to try and collect the veligers in the water body. And we do this when spawning begins, so when the water temperature reaches 12 degrees, and we'll do it a couple times throughout the season. So it's important to note, like, this is just a snapshot in time of what might be in the water. So we aim to focus high use areas like boat launches. So for example, on Clear Lake, we sample 5 different locations to make sure that we're covering the areas where they might be located. And we know that if we have veligers, it's too late. It means we have a reproducing zebra mussels in the body of water. The next type of monitoring we do is environmental DNA, or eDNA. So eDNA are microscopic genetic traces, or DNA, that an organism leaves behind as it moves through an environment. So eDNA is a tool used by researchers to detect the occurrence of organisms that do not normally belong to an ecosystem. The method is an efficient and cost-effective alternative to some of the standard surveying methods used over large areas in aquatic environments, and it's a valuable tool in monitoring programs. So we're actually seeing a huge increase in eDNA monitoring, not only for invasive species, but species at risk as well. It's really interesting. You can take a water sample, and if they have the assay for it, they can determine which fish species are in a body of water. So it's very interesting. But again, it's just a snapshot of what's there at the time of sampling. So same with veligers, we do 5 different places on Clear Lake, focusing on the high use areas. So what's important to note about environmental DNA is that a positive detection doesn't necessarily mean that we have a zebra mussel or a veliger. It just means that the DNA from the species was present at that location the time the sample was collected. So this could possibly happen if a canoe had been in Lake Winnipeg and it didn't have an actual mussel on it. It just came into contact, so it had the DNA, and then it launched in Whirlpool Lake, for example. The next form of monitoring we do is substrate sampling. So this gives a more thorough examination of what's in our water bodies. So what happens is these get deployed in May, and they remain suspended in the water column for the entire season. And it provides a hard surface for the zebra mussels to attach onto. And then we remove them at the end of the season, and we analyze them in the lab at Readymount. Another really neat way we monitor for zebra mussels is through working dogs for conservation. We work with Cindy Sawchuk from the Alberta Environment Parks, and we get her and her dogs out to detect aquatic invasive species. Sawchuk says that testing conducted by these dogs, compared to boat inspections versus humans, the dogs have 100% accuracy and can detect them in 2.3 minutes, while humans only have 75% accuracy, and it takes more than double the time to conduct an inspection on Watercraft. So it's a really, really awesome tool for detecting aquatic invasive species. And they're really cute. And then the third part of identifying actions is rapid response. So one of my big tasks for this winter is developing a response plan and coming up with options for if we were to detect an aquatic invasive species in one of the lakes in Riding Mountain. So the third step is implementing these actions. So we want to make sure that there's enough staff to implement the actions. This is a huge multifunctional program, so we rely on staff from many different functions within the park to get the work done. We use resource conservation staff for the monitoring side of things, interpreters and visitor services staff to conduct the inspections. We ensure that our staff are thoroughly trained at the beginning of the season. One of the benefits of COVID last year was the lake was shut down for a period of time. So we had a solid week and a half where we were able to train our staff, get them some hands-on experience with various different types of watercrafts. And we found that that really helped them gain their confidence in conducting inspections and decontaminations. We mostly rely on students to carry out the prevention program. It's been really great to have students that come back year after year for consistency. And then we prioritize our monitoring efforts with the resources we have. The fourth and final step is modifying and adapting our program to changes. For example, over the past few years, we've seen watercrafts coming from different provinces that are introducing new threats that we haven't necessarily considered before. So for example, Whirling Disease, which I'll talk about in a bit. We ensure that our monitoring programs are modified as new threats arise, and we make changes to actions in light of new AIS threats. And then we make sure that we're being adaptable to these changes as well. So one of the big things that we want to consider is how things are going to change with climate change, how our ecosystems might change to support different aquatic invasive species that we never considered before. We adapt our actions, resources, and budget needs to ever-changing threats, and we'll continue to adapt the program to fit visitors' needs while maintaining ecological integrity. There's a couple invasive species that I wanted to touch on here. We've heard a lot about zebra mussels in the past, and this one is specific to Clear Lake. In 2020, we received reports from anglers that they had been observing and catching smallmouth bass in Clear Lake. And so we spent some time last fall snorkeling and fishing and to try and catch some of these smallmouth bass. We also used eDNA techniques to determine if they were in the water that way. Smallmouth bass are not native to Riding Mountain, and we know that they are very aggressive species and will outcompete native species. We don't know how they got into Clear Lake. We know that some people really like to sport fish smallmouth bass, so it could have been introduced by an intentional introduction or an illegal transfer in hopes of establishing a sport fishery, or it also could have been introduced by dumping live bait into the water as well. Riding Mountain does not stock fish, and we haven't in years. And so our next steps are to determine the extent of the invasion by working with Kisi Queen and First Nation. So we're asking anglers that if they do see or catch a smallmouth bass this summer, to turn it into the AIS inspectors at the Boat Cove. We're very interested in determining the extent of the invasion and the different age classes that might be present. And we may possibly be able to do some genetic testing as well to determine where they came from. Another invasive species that's kind of new to the area, it's an invasive disease, Whirling Disease. It was found in Johnson Lake in Banff National Park in 2016. It hasn't been found in Manitoba yet, but it's a microscopic parasite that affects fish in the salmonid family. So this would include whitefish and trout. It has very high mortality rates in the young life stages of susceptible fish. It causes, you can see in the picture there, it causes deformities in the tail, can cause bulging eyes, causes the tail to become discolored or black, and then they can exhibit a whirling swimming behavior. So the way we're trying to combat against whirling disease is by prohibiting watercrafts that come from moderate to high risk whirling disease zones in Alberta. There are decontamination methods out there, but they're not well developed at this point. They require 90 degrees Celsius hot water, which is much hotter than we currently use, as well as chemicals. And we know from experiences in Alberta that these methods are very harmful to watercrafts, and the chemicals can be harmful to the ecosystems as well. That is it for my first presentation. I'm going to load up my second presentation here and get a little bit more into what you can do to help stop the spread. Okay, so my next presentation is titled Don't Move a Mussel, How You Can Help Prevent the Spread of AIS. So quick presentation overview. I'm going to talk a little bit again about the AIS of concern, how they can spread, our inspection and decontamination processes, and then your responsibility as a watercraft owner. So again, some of the aquatic invasive species of concern to Riding Mountain National Park's water bodies include spiny water flea, rusty crayfish, black algae, smallmouth bass, whirling disease, and zebra mussels. Many of these AIS are on our doorstep, already present in Manitoba, and so that increases our concern greatly. And it's important to note that different species have different requirements for survival and different methods of transportation. So I'm going to use zebra mussels as an example. So zebra mussels originated in Eurasia, which means they are very adapted to cold water. They form in clusters, so you can see on the boat propeller on the bottom there that they are clustered onto it there, and they firmly attach themselves to hard surfaces. And females can produce 1 million eggs per year, which is quite significant. So I'm going to touch on the life cycle of zebra mussels because it's important to understand how they spread. So like I had mentioned, veligers are the microscopic larval form of zebra mussels. At this point in their life stage, they don't have a hard shell, so they're less hardy than the adults. So they can't survive as long out of water, but they can survive in very little amounts of water. So if there's a teeny tiny drop of water left in your watercraft, there could be a veliger in there. So they are transferred by water left in the watercraft. They can be transferred by sand toys or other water-related equipment like bait buckets. And they don't swim, they flow with the water currents. So I'm going to classify the next life stages kind of together because this is when they start to form a hard shell. So the hard shell protects them from the elements. So once if they become attached onto a watercraft, they can close up their shell and remain moist inside, and they can survive outside of water for up to 30 days. So that's why we ask the question to watercraft owners coming for an inspection if they've launched in the last 30 days. So they can be transferred without water. Your boat can be out of water, can be dry, but they still can survive. So how do AIS spread? Well, water left over in watercrafts or water-related equipment, or they can become stuck to watercrafts or water-related equipment. So if a watercraft comes from an invaded water body, invaded by zebra mussels, we ask if they were in the water for 12 hours or more, because it takes about 12 hours for the zebra mussels to start to attach to a watercraft. So what is a watercraft? Any device that floats on water and holds people. So inflatable canoes and kayaks are becoming increasingly more popular. It's really easy to take them, pack them up in your little pack and take them into the backcountry. So this is a big concern for us. Watercrafts are also floaties and dinghies. We see a lot of these on the main beach. They can be motorized watercraft, sailboats, fishing boats, wake boats. Wake boats are particularly high risk because of the ballast tanks, and they could also be stand-up paddle boards as well. And again, same with the inflatable kayaks. A lot of the paddle boards are inflatables, so people roll them up and stick them in their trunk and don't take them out to the next body of water. So there might be a little bit of water left in the bag, which is a big concern. And then water-related equipment. So these are items that can come into contact with the water. So this can be boat trailers, anchors and ropes, life jackets and water wings, other boating and fishing gear, and sand toys as well. So one of the things about carpeted bunks on trailers or carpets in watercrafts, life jackets, ropes, spiny water flea actually have little spines on their tails that make it really easy for them to attach to fabric and material. So this is a big concern for us, and this is why we really check that water-related equipment, because we want to make sure there's nothing stuck onto it. for our inspection program, it is mandatory for all watercraft wishing to launch in our water bodies to undergo a free mandatory inspection. So inspections are available 7 days a week at the Boat Cove on Clear Lake. They can take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the type and the size of your watercraft. It's important for your watercraft owners to know when and where they last launched, because this is one of the first questions the inspectors will ask. And also knowing where AIS might hide on your watercraft. This will significantly help the inspectors. So if you have live wells or any other compartments, you might be asked to open those up to see if there's any water left in them. You might also be asked to drop your motor to see if any water comes out. Another really important thing that we see a lot of is people transporting their watercraft with their drain plugs in. It's actually illegal in Manitoba to transport your watercraft with the plug in. So make sure that you're always pulling that out when you leave a water body so it can drain properly. Another really important part to remember in the inspection process is that we are separate from the provincial government inspection stations. So we do not accept inspections conducted by different government agencies or lake groups. So even if you do stop at inspection station at Headingley, you're still required to stop at the inspection stations on Clear Lake before launching in any of our water bodies. So a watercraft may not pass an inspection if the inspectors find mud or sand or plant debris or living things in or on your watercraft. If they find water in your motor, live wells, or hull, or if you launched in a high risk or contaminated body of water within the last 30 days. And if your watercraft does not pass an inspection, a decontamination will be required. And just like the inspection process, decons are free of charge. They can take 10 minutes to 90 minutes, depending on the complexity of the watercraft and the decontamination. So we use 60 degrees Celsius hot water at a low pressure and 10-second exposure time to kill the zebra mussels. We don't use any chemicals at all. And again, we don't accept decontaminations done by the province or watercraft owners. A lot of watercraft owners also ask if they can do the decontamination themselves. If you want to wash your boat, that's fine. We recommend coming straight to us for the decontamination so that we know that the water is properly treated if there are zebra mussels or other aquatic invasive species there. So again, our decontamination station is open 7 days a week during the peak season. As for our permitting process, we have two different types of permits in the park. Temporary permits, which are valid for up to 7 days and are good for folks visiting the park for short periods of time, and seasonal permits. So watercraft owners must take the seasonal permit holder course, and then they'll be eligible for the inspection and permit. Again, it's important to note that if you launch your watercraft outside of the park, your permit becomes invalid and you must come back for another inspection. This year, what we're doing for seasonal permit holders is we are in the process of developing a video that will go up on our website. And so seasonal permit holders that have previously taken the course will have to watch that video and take a short quiz, and then they'll be eligible to have an inspection done and receive a seasonal permit. So what can you do as a watercraft owner to prevent the spread of AIS? So we use the same messaging as many other agencies. So clean your watercraft, trailer, and water-related equipment as soon as you leave a body of water. Check to ensure there's no plant matter, mud, or living things attached to your watercraft or water-related equipment. Second step is to drain all of the water from your watercraft and water-related equipment. Ensure you're not traveling with your drain plug-in. And if you pull it as soon as you leave a body of water and drain the water out, then you'll make sure that anything that might be in the water stays at that body of water. And then thirdly, dry all parts of your watercraft and water-related equipment before launching in a different body of water. You can use a rag or a towel or sponge to soak up the water, or leave your watercraft and equipment out in the sun to speed up the drying process. Another really important thing is to make sure that you're following the rules and regulations set by Readymount National Park. So do not transport any live aquatic animals, plants, or water from other sources, including live bait. And discuss the concerns of AIS with your family and friends. Make sure that they know about the inspection program so that they can be prepared to stop for an inspection or a potentially decontamination when they get to the park. And then what to do if you do find an aquatic invasive species, or you suspect that you may have found one. You can call Parks Canada Dispatch, and they will call the right people to come and ID the species for you. And that is it.
A lot of information, Brandice.
Thank you.
And we invite more of your questions by a chat. And we do have a few to start with here. Wondering in terms of how critical it is for boaters to have access to a decontamination station. And I know that we probably don't have enough in the province. And what can you say to that in terms of how you see the importance of access to a decontamination station?
In terms of access, it would definitely be nice to have a provincial decontamination station close to the park. But we will never turn anyone away from a decontamination, no matter where they want to launch. We want to ensure that not only the water bodies in the park are free of AIS, but water bodies around the park as well. So we won't turn anyone away, and we just encourage that if you have been in a body of water and plan to come to the park next, or any other body of water for that matter, drying your watercraft out is a really good way to prevent the spread, and it doesn't take long in the sun to dry it out. So that's a really good, simple, easy way to decon watercrafts.
You spoke about communities requiring, lake communities requiring government approval to, in fact, require boats to be inspected and control the launch of those boats in their lake. Could you comment a little further on that, and how would a community go about that?
I cannot speak to what the province requires in terms of inspection stations. I can offer advice on what we do, but I'm not exactly sure what their process is in terms of permitting and what's required on their end of things.
One here, which water bodies, if any, near Readymount National Park does your program test and monitor for AIS?
Yeah, so we work in conjunction with the province to conduct monitoring at a few lakes around Riding Mountain. They obviously have a lot of ground and a lot of lakes to cover in the province, so we do help them out a little bit. We are especially concerned about water bodies where we know people are going to before they come to Riding Mountain. So those ones are ones we consider high risk, and all of the lakes that we monitor are within the biosphere reserve. So we help out the province in that sense a little bit there.
That's awesome. When will the online permitting course start, Brandice?
We are aiming for the refresher course to be up by May 1st. We're starting filming next week for that. And as for the actual initial sessions, I think last year we started them around May long. We haven't come up with a schedule yet, but it'll be very similar to last year. So we do, if you type in Riding Mountain National Park boating and paddling into your Google search, that the information will be updated there when we get the schedule.
This is kind of a follow-up question to the one about the lakes that you monitor for AIS around the area. And is there a way to find out which of those lakes are being monitored, and is Ditch Lake in fact one of those?
Ditch Lake is in fact one of those. In terms of finding out that information, we don't provide any of that information. I'm not sure if the province does or not. But yes, Ditch Lake is one of those. It is one that we do see watercrafts come to after they've been in Ditch Lake. So that is one.
And another question here is, what is the Whirlpool Lake story? What actions have been taken there that you're aware of?
Yeah, so I believe this was before my time with the program, but there was a positive environmental DNA detection there a few years ago. And so they closed down the lake as part of the rapid response plan to ensure that there was no further spread by recreational watercrafts. And so the lake remained closed for a couple of years while extensive monitoring was done. And so there, after they found that initial eDNA detection, there was a lot of veliger, eDNA, and substrate sampling that happened, and they never found a live mussel. And so it's one of those situations where we're not exactly sure what happened there. Could have been a false positive, that does happen. Could have been contamination somehow. But we are happy to report that Whirlpool Lake has not had a positive detection since 2017, I believe. So it is now reopened to the public.
Great. Kind of a couple of questions that are somewhat similar here. In terms of community doing some of their own sampling and analysis, like when you talk about substrate monitoring and water filtration using the eDNA method, what are there things that community could do, lake community could do on their own to analyze?
That is a question that I don't have the answer to. That would be a provincial question. They issue us a special permit so that we can do those lakes outside the park, and we have to ensure that we're following the very strict guidelines that they have in place in terms of decontaminating our equipment between lakes and making sure that we're following all of the protocols to make sure that we're not causing any cross-contamination to occur. So that's something that I'm not exactly sure. I know that they are definitely very concerned about cross-contamination occurring between water bodies. And so that might be, Jim might have more information on that, but yeah, I can't speak to that, unfortunately.
I think the question probably is a little more related maybe to, are there things we could do just that you think communities could do, notwithstanding regulations, we have to meet or agree with? Are there things that could be done?
Yeah, for sure.
What could we do?
One really simple thing that can be done is checking infrastructure. So if you have a dock, you can go out and check and make sure there's no zebra mussels attached to the dock or your watercraft if it's moored. I know that the province does have a tip line, so if you do find an aquatic invasive species, you can call their tip line and they will have someone come and check that out for you. That's a really simple way to help out for sure.
You talked about a rapid...
We do that often in the park as well.
I'm sorry. You talked about a rapid response plan. What are the most important elements in your mind to have in a rapid response plan if a community were at that stage of developing such a thing?
Yeah, I think early detection is definitely key. It also really depends on the species. If you're specifically looking for zebra mussels, the response is probably going to be a little bit more rapid and detailed than if you were looking at something like maybe smallmouth bass, for example. Just thinking about our response here, zebra mussels are definitely going to have more impacts than some other species. But determining risk factors of different species is definitely very important. And then just ensuring that you have the steps kind of outlined so that you know exactly what's going to happen if you do get a positive detection. So who you're going to call, maybe how they might use your lake group, for example, to help out if there is any way. I'm not exactly sure in terms of the province, but I know that for us, it's really important to kind of determine how we're going to respond in terms of if we're going to close the lake, if we're going to keep it open, how we're going to work together with other lake groups or the province, making sure that we have all those communications in place if there were ever a positive detection.
How important is mitigation of zebra mussels in Clear Lake to all of the other lakes in the surrounding area, Brandice?
I think it's extremely important, and that's why we've been focusing so much on prevention. It's because of the outflow of Clear Lake. We know that it could have some potential downstream impacts, and so we've put a lot of time and effort into preventing zebra mussels from coming into Clear Lake. We also know that it's a lot easier to prevent the spread than it is to get rid of them once they're there. So that's where our focus has been.
What would happen if Clear Lake were to become infested with zebra mussels, Brandice? What would they do?
That is a great question, and that is why I am writing a rapid response plan. We don't have any solid decisions made yet, but it is something that I've been working on, and I'm going to be talking to our management team about in the next couple of months here to try and make some decisions about what we would do if we were to get a positive detection.
So in lake communities where it becomes a designated control zone, what would be the implication of that if it ever happened or came to that in our area here for one of our lakes or areas around that lake?
So once you, I believe the province's rules, once you leave a control zone, then you have to get an inspection and decontamination to make sure you're taking the steps to clean, drain, dry, and remove the invasive species. So I'm not exactly sure what the province would do if there was a positive detection on this side of the province, as a lot of their decontamination stations and inspection stations are focused around the Lake Winnipeg area. And catching the people coming off of Lake Winnipeg. So yeah, I'm not too sure what the province would do about that. I would hope that there might be an inspection or decontamination station come out this way, but I'm not too sure.
Lord knows we hope this never happens, but what if Clear Lake were to become a designated control zone? What would be the implication of that then for the park and for surrounding area and tourists?
Good question. That's another thing that I'm going to be addressing in our rapid response plan with the management team in a couple of months. We don't have any decisions quite yet about what we're going to be doing in terms of monitoring watercrafts or controlling watercrafts coming on and off the lake. So that's definitely a big question I have for our management team.
When and how were smallmouth bass initially detected in Clear Lake, Brandice?
So it was, I think, August 5th, 2020. We had an avid angler who frequents these workshops report it to one of our staff members. He was unable to catch one at the time, but he did observe them in Clear Lake. And so shortly after that, the wardens just happened to be talking to some anglers at the Bull Cove, and they indicated that they had observed them as well and actually caught some, and they provided us with photo evidence and videos as well of the smallmouth bass in Clear Lake. And so we were able to determine from the pictures and videos that there were different age classes present. So that kind of initiated our next steps in trying to determine what exactly was there. And so we did put effort into doing some snorkeling and some angling and some eDNA sampling as well. So efforts are ongoing in trying to catch those. We had the wardens out and about this winter asking anglers if they caught one to call it in, bring it in so we can do some additional testing. But smallmouth bass are a little more dormant and they like to go down to the depths in the winter time. So we haven't had one turned in yet, but we're hoping to have some luck this summer with that.
And impacts of zebra mussels on native freshwater mussels is apparently considered a major threat. What is our National Park's understanding on freshwater mussels in Clear Lake and at other lakes in the park area?
Yeah, we know we have them, and I don't, to my knowledge, I don't think that there's really been any formal monitoring done for native mussels, but we do know that we have them for sure. But zebra mussels definitely will outcompete the native mussels. We've also seen where they, because the mussels provide a hard shell or hard substrate for the zebra mussels to attach onto, they can cluster onto those native mussels and choke them out. So yeah, we know that we have them, and we know that they definitely will be impacted. We're just not too sure of the current populations of our native mussels.
You mentioned that Clear Lake, Readymount National Park does not stock Clear Lake. And is the reason for that the risk and fear of introducing aquatic invasive species through that process, or is it for other reasons?
I think the stocking program ended. I can't remember when it ended. It was quite a while ago. It's just was introducing non-native species to Clear Lake, and they could potentially have impacts on our native species. So that's the main reason why the stocking program ended.
That's awesome, Brandice. I want to thank everybody for the questions you submitted tonight. That has added a lot to the workshop, and great questions. And to you, Brandice, as well, for not only two great presentations, but for fielding the questions. You did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, Brandice, for your very informative presentations and answers to the wide range of questions. And thank you, Dennis, for your assistance with the Q&A. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all once again for joining us. And we hope you join us again next week. All the best to you and your families.